Are the headlines we're seeing about the war in Iran telling the full story, or is there a hidden war going on behind the scenes? My guest today, Tom Luongo, believes this is ultimately a battle between the new world led by the United States and old colonial money in the form of the British Empire and elite European political circles. In other words, Davos. And he believes the globalists are on the back foot. We dive into his thesis, talk about Trump visiting China and what it means for the future of cooperation between those two countries, and so much more. Here's Tom Luongo. Tom Luongo, it is great to have you back on Commodity Culture. I want to start with the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran because you have a very different take on what's happening than most guests I have on the show and what's the prevailing narrative on social media, which is, of course, that Israel is directly controlling the United States and essentially issuing orders and calling the shots. There's speculation that a large part of this could be linked to the Epstein files and blackmail instigated by the Mossad on the US political administration, along with massive donor funding coming out of AIPAC to push events in the desired direction for Israel's benefit. Could you first address why that narrative is incorrect and then walk us through what is really driving this conflict?
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, Jesse, it's pretty obvious that this is that's a narrative, and it's a narrative that has a good nugget, a bunch of nuggets of truth in it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and deny that APAC doesn't have influence over various members of our Congress, but the idea that the United States, as a effect, the preeminent military and I wouldn't say industrial because you literally say that about China, but in economic and military power in the world, like we don't have to take orders from 8 million Jews in the Middle East, and we don't, or 18 million Jews worldwide. We don't. It's a convenient narrative, and it's one that I've been saying for 2 years is wait for if Trump comes back to power, they're gonna hang him with his relationship with Israel. I have a lot of very nascent ideas about how this is all playing out that I haven't had a chance to really um, organize yet, and I'm gonna leave that for as I get it finished. I'm gonna get it. I'll get it out to the subscribers of the newsletter this month first before I start putting it into the podcast circuit. Simply because I want to make sure that I have everything right before I get there. But let's just go through this. The bigger question has been for a while now is what is the role of the old colonial powers of Europe that we know have their fingerprints all over the Middle East? Like to deny British and French colonial activity in the Middle East for the last 150 years is, or more, is, to deny history and deny reality. Israel was created with the idea by the British to be, an irritant and a node of chaos in the Middle East. No one's going to argue that point. Um, but I would argue, and I think it's pretty safe to make this argument now, especially after 2.5 months worth of quote unquote conflict over Iran, that we found out that the IRGC and the whole axis of resistance strategy was also a British operation, or at least a British and French operation. There's a lot of money. I mean, we have now documented a lot of monetary and kind of system level ties between the IRGC specifically, and not necessarily the civilian government of Iran, and my dog agrees with me, of course. The That we've now see all that, and this is kind of what this war has opened up for. So what we've always had is, like Alex Craner would point out to, is that we have the red ants and black ants. We put them in a jar, shake them up, and then we get chaos, right? And the Brits love the chaos, and so does what the broader old colonial powers of Europe, known as Davos, because I don't see there's really any real difference between City of London is just ultimately the metaphor for where the money flows, right? But if you look at the situation, notice how since the initial strikes between the United States and Iran, how Israel got hit hard early on, but the Iranians also struck out at all of the other Gulf states. And since then, they've had a particular hate on for the United Arab Emirates. And this is very important. I think we need to realize at some point that This was never about Israel issuing orders to Donald Trump because no one issues orders to Donald Trump. Like, I'm sorry. Have you met the man? Like, seriously? No one issues orders to him. He issues orders. And that I think is the bigger thing. If you just like look at it from that perspective, is there overlap in the incentives in the Venn diagram between what Israel wants and what the United States wants? Of course. Can you, if you're a narrative creating jackass, frankly, you would, if you were London trying to protect your interests in the region, you would focus everybody's attention on the overlap of the Venn diagram. You wouldn't focus on the differences. You would try and point everybody towards where they agree, right? Whereas if you just step back and do broader, simple, everyday, boring old incentives based geopolitical analysis, you realize that the United States has a lot of reasons to deny Iran a nuclear weapon. So do the Israelis. They may be for different reasons. One is far more existential for the Israelis than it is for the United States. Regardless of whether you like Israel, like Jews, hate Jews, I don't care. Israel has incentives and Israel has national interests. And they're just acting on, and so if you're Israel and you can get the United States to agree to go attack Iran and line the incentives up on both sides, then it makes sense for the two of them to work together to do this thing. So now the question is, what's this thing? What does it really mean? Because what I'll argue, and I have argued strenuously, is that Iran is not what it looks like. Like, everybody likes a simple, as Mike Farris would put it, superhero analysis of this, right? And I can't stand listening to him like do this because it's hilarious because he has no clue as to what he's really talking about, which is that Iran is the victim of Israeli hegemony, Israeli aggression, and American hegemony. The U.S. and Israel are the villains, and who's the hero in the story? Well, nobody, or everybody who's against Israel, greater ambitions and all and all of the other stuff. And so those are supposed to be the heroes. So then I guess Russia and China get to be the heroes because they're the ones backing Iran to stand up to the evil United States. And that's one form of the narrative. The other narrative is that Iran is heroically suckering the United States into a Thucydides trap in the Persian Gulf. The only way you can make that argument is if you define winning in such a way on the part of the United States as something the United States is not, one, capable of doing, or two, is any interest in. So in order to break that down, let's go and ask what are the United States incentives for dealing with Iran? And it's far beyond them getting a nuclear weapon. That is what everything culminates down to. We're going to stop them from having a nuclear weapon. Why? Well, we know why. Because the minute somebody looked at Iran sideways, they, quote unquote, tried to close the Straits of Hormuz. They got a lot of help from Lloyd's of London. They got a lot of help from a bunch of idiot Indian ship captains who refused to, go through on the Omani side, the Omani side of the strait, which is where all the navigable water is. Like, we have a lot of pantomime and we have a lot of, frankly, shit going on to extend and pretend this this narrative. But what is Trump actually doing? Well, when you step back and you look at the straits, you realize, well, the Saudis are now exporting 7 million barrels a day across the Arabian Peninsula to the Red Sea. Not a Houthi missile in sight, by the way. Huh. And everybody said the Houthis would just blow that up in 20 minutes. Didn't do so, did they? The UAE wants to export 3.5 now up to, by the end of next year, 3.5 million barrels a day on the Gulf of Oman side of the strait at Fujairah, right? They're already pumping like 2 million barrels a day. That pipeline's done. They just announced this morning they want to expand that to 3.5 to 3.8 million barrels a day. You've got other oil traveling north and out through the Mediterranean, and you've got everybody else going into the Gulf of America and loading up on American oil. And then what has Trump done with the two major Pacific powers in the last 2 months? He's secured deals with them to buy oil from Alaska. Why do they have to buy oil from the Straits of Hormuz and then the Straits of Malacca and then sail it all past Vietnam and the Paracel Islands and the Spratlys and all of that, like in the South China Sea, which is all this ugly navigable potential nonsense. Why don't we just go like load up in Alaska and drive it across the Pacific Ocean directly to the ports and on coastal China? Same thing with Japan. So Trump's rewiring the global flow of oil and the global flow of trade away from all the classic geographic choke points of the old world. And the old world, in this case, of course, is Europe through the Middle East into Africa. That is literally the old world, capital O, capital W. What are the Americas? The literal new world, capital new, capital world, right? Capital N, capital W. And when you see the world, when you look at when you think of, you spin the globe and look at it that way, you're like, oh, well, Iran's not really all that important if the center of global trade is now centered around the Americas, the Chinese coast, and Russia's eastern frontier in Japan and the Southeast Asia. We don't need Europe anymore. We don't need Iran anymore. We don't need this complication anymore. So when you start looking and you read the Trump administration's documents, you read the national security strategy documents, you read effectively the Don Road doctrine, which is what they're calling it. It's pretty obvious what he's doing. He's made deals with Morocco to ensure that we have access to Gibraltar, because Spain is unreliable. We've made deals with Indonesia on the opposite side of the Straits of Malacca. How about we ask a simple question? Why is Singapore a separate city-state from Malaysia? Did anybody ever ask that question? Oh, maybe it's because the British wanted to put up a choke point on the Straits of Malacca and have a banking center there. Huh, what a shock. They do this everywhere, right? I've only just begun to even think about the situation with the Gulf of America, Cuba, and the potential geographic choke points around Cuba. Why are they in Cuba? Why are the Russians in Cuba? Why did the Cold War come to Cuba? It's because it access to the Gulf of America, right? So when you look at it that way, the United States and Israel can have overlapping concerns, right, over Iran's nuclear programs. And then you have to ask yourself the question, why does Iran want a nuclear weapon? Now, the convenient narrative is, of course, they have to protect themselves from Israeli aggression and U.S. hegemony. And that's the prevailing anti-war kind of, libertarian version of geopolitical analysis been going around for 30, 40 years. I'm not saying it's not wrong. It's a perspective, but it's not the only perspective there is. Because, note, the shadow empire, the French, the British, and everybody else, everybody ignores history. Everybody thinks in terms of, oh, it's only the CIA that overthrew Mossadegh. Oh, like the MI6 had nothing to do with that, right? Really? Okay, so, give us all a break here. So when you stop to remind yourself that history didn't start in 1992, or it didn't start in 1946, and didn't start in 2014, or whatever it is that you decided you wanted to become an expert in, when you start to look at the entire flow of this, you realize that it's a much more interesting story than you think it is. And now the question I have for everybody is the following: why did Israel stop being Iran's target after a couple of days into the war? And all of a sudden, every time the UAE makes a move, they're bombing the UAE. Ooh. Well, maybe it's because Dubai was meant to be the setup for the new center for money and banking. I sent an email the other day, yesterday actually, from a fan who linked me to one of Martin Armstrong's latest interviews. And I'm friends with Marty, and Marty's a good man. And Marty let it slip. He's like, why are they so angry with the UAE? Well, it's because, remember, after the Swiss gave up their banking privacy rules, the offshore European money moved to Dubai. So Dubai was being set up as an offshore banking center, right? It was being set up as the new, metaphorically speaking, the new city of London, because clearly they're liquidating the British Isles. They're liquidating Canada, or they're trying to turn Canada into a vassal state and just suck the resources dry and leave Canada as a European Union outpost on North American continent. So why the focus on the UAE? The UAE's like left OPEC. We're in control of Venezuela. Venezuela is a founding member of OPEC. You think they're going to be in OPEC for very much longer? Not if Donald Trump has anything to say about it. Well, he's, like OPEC is dying right in front of our eyes. The cartel is breaking. The UAE is going to like pump 5 million barrels a day. Right? We don't need Iran anymore. So now the bigger question is, and this is where it gets a little interesting, a little spicy. What if the UAE was always meant to be the next place that they decamped to? The globalists, that is. I'm not, again, not saying Brit versus just the, Davos, the high table, that shadowy group of people that are clearly moving, clearly setting things in motion. Right? They have agency, they have access, they have they're the hidden hand, they're the invisible hand on the shoulders of people like Keir Starmer and Mark Carney and Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen and many people in our Congress and whatnot. Why is everybody so histrionic over Trump going after Iran? It's in America's best interest to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon and force all the oil flow and the trade flow to the United States, right? I mean, it's in our best interest. Why does anybody care? Because it's immoral, it's wrong. This is geopolitics. There are no morals here. And is it moral for a bunch of like strip everything away? Iran's axis of resistance strategy, strip all the moralizing away, strip all the hatred, the American and Israeli, the American self-hatred and Israeli hatred away. And it's just terrorism. It's just, it comes out of the mouths of people that you hate, like John McCain. You're supposed to hate John McCain. He's an odious and horrible human being. It comes out of the mouths of people like Hillary Clinton, who are odious and terrible. Like, if you're trying to move people into a particular position and get them to react emotionally, of course you're going to give them ready-made media villains, ready-made. You're going to put terrible ideas or good ideas in the mouths of terrible people in order to discredit them. Like, this is classic divide and rule stuff. And we've been living under this for so long, and we've been living under these definitions of who's the victim, who's the villain, who's the hero for so long that we don't know whether, frankly, for Jesse, I know I'm supposed to try to keep it clean. None of us know whether to shit or go blind, as my dad would put it. Right? We don't know what to make of any of this because it's all really confusing. And what I would say is, as always, well, when you're confused, that's usually the prima facie evidence of an intelligence operation, right? When you can bamboozle people for 3 generations, that's a really successful intelligence operation. When you can do that and embed it into the institutions and embed yourself in the global architecture, then that's where you wind up. And this is why I think this is, when they hand you a narrative and when a country like Israel acts in such a reprehensible manner like they did after 10/7, it's easy for everybody to get upset. It's easy. And you should be upset. Like, no one is denying that what they did was unacceptable, right? No one is denying that. But as geopolitical strategists, and then ask yourself, why did 10/7 occur the way it did? Why are there so many questions about it? Why can we never know the truth about it? 9/11, all these other these incidents in time when we're not allowed to know, and we just let everybody's pet theories play themselves out, and then they just get goosed and amplified, tweaking the algorithms, sending misinformation around, getting disinformation agents out into the zeitgeist, because we're all just this is what we're watching in real time, and we see it at the institutional level with players like again, all the people I've mentioned so far, the Mitt Romneys and the Hillary Clintons and the von der Leyens and all that. They're all talking out both sides of their mouth all the time. They're all pushing an agenda. All right. So you have to read through that. And the best way to read through all that is, sometimes, as my partner in crime, Dexter White, likes to say, facts matter. Pull up a map, look at a globe, and look at, and then just get away from all of that stuff and simplify. One of the ways that, and then once you do that, you're like, ooh, maybe this story is a lot simpler than you think it is, but it's so thoroughly orthogonal to the story you've been told, it looks like it's insanely complicated. When it just comes down to, oh, look, as always, one area of the world is losing power. They have some proxies middle power proxies that they've empowered to like make, to create chaos. And then they activate them whenever whenever their power is threatened. That's not a very complicated story, right? It's not. And actually, it's probably more explanatory than anything else. And what really gets people's goat is when they've set themselves so in motion and they've set their personal identity around being, the American that is in opposition to the evil that our country's done and we have done. And especially when we have like four terrible presidents in a row, starting with Bush the first, right? It's easy to hate your own country. I did. I did for a long time. Like, that's not the America I grew up with. That's not the America enshrined in the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. What is that country? That's a terrible thing. But at some point, you have to remind yourself that when change occurs, you should embrace it, right? And so I think, for all of his faults and for all of his braggadocio and for all of his inability to play by the quote unquote rules of uh, of diplomacy, right? Donald Trump is doing exactly what he needs to do to blow open all these old narratives and realign the world in a different way. And I think that's. I know it's a long answer to what should be a very simple question, but Israel at this point isn't even part of the conversation about the Straits of Hormuz. Notice how they're not even part of the conversation anymore. And anybody trying to bring it back up again, masking the Epstein files, blah, 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 this looks like they're completely out of touch because bigger things were already happening. And so maybe we should just look at it from that perspective.
The sponsor of today's episode is ARC Silver Gold Osmium. Owner Ian Everard is praised even by his competitors as one of the most honest and level-headed bullion dealers in the United States. They have some great prices. You can see some of them displayed right now on screen. Take advantage of these specials today by reaching out to Ian at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. Make sure to tell him, of course, that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. Yeah, let's dive into more specifically what the end game is here for the Trump administration, in your view. Ultimately, what objective are they trying to achieve on the world stage? You mentioned some very important points, but I'd just like to crystallize it a little bit further and get some clarity there. And how long do you see this conflict in the Middle East continuing for? Is this something you see getting wrapped up potentially this year? Is this a years-long conflict that's going to draw in other regional powers? I'd love to get your thoughts there as well.
Sure. I think that's a very fair follow-up, and I appreciate it. The conflict over Iran it's not settled yet, but it, for all intents and purposes, is, right? The Iranians are playing a game where they still think that they have benefactors, be it French or French or British or Chinese or Russian or whomever. Well, clearly the Chinese, after Trump's meeting with Xi in Beijing, they've been like, for the last couple of weeks, they've been like, look, wrap this shit up. Like, let's get this over and done with. We need oil. We want this taken care of. Like, this is nonsensical. The Russians, they benefit from this disruption because now they can, once the sanctions are lifted, they can pump more oil and they can maybe get out from underneath this dumb war that they're having to fight in Ukraine, which they don't want to fight. No one wants them to fight. So they're not interested in extending this. So who's interested in extending it? Well, it always comes back down to the same people, the ones who are desperately trying to stop whatever it is that they're hiding. Somebody's hiding a very, very, very important secret. And I don't know what that secret is. I mean, I have some ideas, but I don't want to talk about them here yet. I'm not trying to play cagey. I just don't know that I want to go in this. I want to take the conversation in that direction right now. I'm gonna do so in a couple of weeks. I know I will. But for right now, I'm gonna say no because I just like started reframing this in my head. But I know it's centered around Europe. I know it's centered around Britain. I know it's centered around the relationship between them and the IRGC. What the inciting incident is there, what the secret is probably staring us in the face, but let's just talk about it. They're protecting something. Be that they're protecting Russiagate or they're protecting the JCPOA or they're protecting something, right? They're really trying to protect, of course, is maintaining flow control over global um, money flow and through the use of the oil markets, right? And using oil volatility as a weapon. That's the big one. I think that's what Trump's ultimate goal is to do away with that. I really do believe that. I said this in another podcast recently. I was going over it. I'm like, I really do believe that Trump wants to do away with all of this fighting over oil and oil flows. Oil should be boring. It shouldn't be constantly in our face as the, oh my God, what's the price of oil going to be tomorrow, and then the price of gasoline and everything else. Does anybody care about the price of coal? Only the producers and the consumers. The coal is just as disjointed a market. It's got just as many different grades of coal as there is grades of oil and everything else. And and like at the end of the day, coal was uninteresting. You know why? Because no one could put up a choke point in a toll booth around the flows of coal anymore. We don't run our ships on coal anymore to move goods around the world. We haven't financialized the world around coal as a means by which to affect global trade, right? It's important for baseload generation. It's important for making steel. It's important for a variety of things, but it's not that. So guess what? There's no coal futures market that matters, right? But there is a Brent crude benchmark contract, right? That everybody watches like a hawk every day, and then tries to tie everything to the price of Brent crude, and therefore if you've got control over that dial, right? Well, then you have power to move markets. You have power to um, uh, um, get rid of presidents. You have the ability to topple governments. You have the ability to, you know, um, fund proxies and proxy armies and terrorists and this and run, and all of it. Like it is the base layer of the foundation of global instability flows through the oil markets, not for any other reason than because so much of it flows through these geographic choke points, and it's so central to the way we do business currently. Now, the key word in that sentence is currently. Remap and rewire the world away from those classic geographic choke points. Oil should get more boring, get really boring really fast. Not dealing with insane levels of volatility where the price of oil is moving, $5 to $7 a barrel a week, right? So what I would say is that's what Trump's strategic goal is, and that's the first one. And then by doing that, then you start creating all the other. Then there's a whole lot of other downstream effects that come from that. But if you get rid of that, and we get rid of the end of oil volatility as a weapon, and all of a sudden, City of London doesn't have nearly as much power as it used to because it's invested how much money in Iran. And don't forget, at the end of the day, whether you think the United States has won militarily or lost strategically or whatever, you blew up 50 years worth of assets that the Iranians have been building. Like that's real capital. That's real deployed capital that was built, that was funneled into weapon systems, ballistic missiles, launchers, holes in the ground, this, that, everything. Is all of this, Hermit Kingdom shit that they did. And we blew up trillions of dollars of it. And it's not like the Iranians have an economy that can, because they chose to spend all of that money that they were making off oil sales on this Hermit Kingdom strategy. Well, it's gone. And so Trump doesn't need to invade Iran. He doesn't need regime change in Iran. He doesn't need any of those things. When you see the Atlantic crew, when you see the Kagans and the Newlands and those guys all screaming with Chatham House in the UK screaming that Trump doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have their plan. Fundamentally different. When you see the Duganists on the other side come, and I mean this sincerely, when I look at people like Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly and all the rest of them, literally arguing Alexander Dugin talking points about how all Iran has to do is survive to win. Again, that's defining winning in a way that the United States didn't define it in the first place. Maybe that's Iran's definition of winning, but oh wow, that was a good strategy. You lost 50 years worth of investment in your country. You've alienated the Chinese. You've alienated the Russians, maybe. You've done a lot of things, right? And now you've also alienated all the Gulf states on the other side of the Persian Gulf, right? They're not your partners anymore in OPEC, setting oil prices. You're not part of the Gulf Cooperation. You're going to soon not be a part of the Gulf Cooperation Council. It's all going to blow up. Now what? So what I would argue is that Trump is moving to decomplicate the Middle East. The Gulf Arab states want out of this insane scenario. He's offered them a different architecture for global institutions for conflict resolution and for investment that's fundamentally different than what we've seen previously. And I would look to the Gaza Board of Peace as a model for what he's trying to build into the future. And say, look, we don't need monolithic organizations like the UN, the WHO, the BIS, and all that. I think he's going after all these institutions. He's going after the UN, NATO, all of it. I think he's made a pretty strong case that we don't need any of them because he's exposed all of them as nothing but, enemies of whatever it is that the United States has ever, when the United States says, look, it's not in our best interest. And they all, yes, it is. You have to, and then they all light their hair on fire. Like, really? Why are you lighting your hair on fire? Why do you care? Why do you care? Wouldn't it be better if we didn't have a bunch of non-agreement capable Persian death cultists running Iran? Wouldn't it be better if we had somebody else other than those people running Iran? Same thing with Maduro in Venezuela. Same thing with the Castro brothers down in Cuba, and keep going around the country, going around the world. Mexico, this place, that. Globalists like Mark Carney running Canada into the ground. I might add, right? Like, why should we accept the status quo? So blow up the status quo, use leverage, and say to people, look, we can build a different world that on the other side of the conflict is a better thing. So how long is the conflict going to last? Because that's what you originally asked. Well, funny you should ask that because Trump's going to be coming home from China this weekend. And as far as I'm concerned, the Iranians have been given multiple ultimatums about their negotiating strategy. They've run out of time to play this game of extended pretend, to negotiate like Zelensky, which is basically to not negotiate. And the Chinese have basically thrown them under the bus. I expect another wave of bombing from the United States. We have more assets in theater now than we did in late February. I think they're all locked and loaded and ready to go. I think the rest of the Arabian Peninsula is on board with this, including the Saudis. Obviously, the UAE, they've already been attacking Iran, so have the Saudis. Nobody talks about it. It's happening. I think Iran really gets into the FO portion of FAFO, and they've FA'd, and now they're going to FO, and then it's going to be done. And it's also going to create a supply disruption in oil, and other things that are going to take some time to work themselves out. I read a tweet this morning from Tracy Schuchart that I really appreciated. And I'll give a shout out to Tracy on this one. It was a very good post, which is to say, oil markets think in days, right? Refineries think in weeks. Businesses think in months. Supply chains think in quarters, right? And investments think in years. And so we're going to watch a wave after wave after wave after wave of this disruption flow through the various layers of the global economy for a long time. And it's going to cause a reorganization of the global economy. And so I guess the best, the best, and when and it was just a lovely tweet, and it was very succinct, and it was smart. I'm glad she put it out there that way, because you know, when you encounter something that pithy and true, it's usually, you know, it's like it's a nice distillation of that. And um so from my perspective, I'm like, yeah, it's gonna be hard. You know, we're not gonna remake and rewire the world without pain. The question is, whose pain? Everybody's gonna feel some pain. I think when I first started coming on your show, we were talking about my arguments about Jerome Powell and the Fed and the 5 basis points to change the world and all that. What did I say back then? I said, well, Powell was betting, and to TLDR, and this is Powell was betting with SOFR that the United States economy can handle a higher cost of capital than the Eurodollar markets that are based on, you know, that dollar flow. We're going to find out. So you raise interest rates to 5.5%. Everybody else had to freak out, and we watched the world get rewired around SOFR. Eurodollar futures going away, LIBOR's gone, blah 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 blah. The United States weathered it. Everybody expected the world to implode, and it didn't. But we watched an awful lot of areas of the world have to make major moves with their money to maintain what version of status quo they have. So famously, I've gone over the TIC report, and I've watched Europe accumulate over almost $2 trillion worth of U.S. Treasuries on their central bank balance sheets in order to do yield curve control. We're not doing yield curve control. They're doing yield curve control for us because their banks are more vulnerable. Their central banks are more vulnerable than ours is. And now with Trump coming back to power and changing the way we do business in the United States completely, moving the Treasury back to the center of the creation of new monetary units, Clarity Act is going to pass. Fed is being deprecated. Kevin Warsh just got confirmed yesterday. First thing he says is Bitcoin's the new gold. Um, um, Dudes, like, the world is changing, and everybody's going to have to take a large haircut and figure out how it is that they're going to react to these changes. The money that the United States taxpayer was paying into liquefy the entire world is ending. And that's the bigger story. And under no circumstances, if I'm Donald Trump, would I stand for being blackmailed by, again, a bunch of non-agreement capable Persian death cultists. I'm not doing it. I'm going to blow them up, and I'm going to force everybody to buy oil from the United States and from my partners in in Arabia and other places, Venezuela. We're going to develop oil assets all across the Americas, and we're going to move forward while we're at the same time opening up, you know, new frontiers in nuclear energy. Okay, let's go for it. Let's stop playing this old game, this 19th century game. Let's start playing the 21st century game. And I think that's what he put on the table to the Chinese this week while he was in Beijing. I think that's why he brought all those people like Tim Cook and Elon Musk and, you know, Jensen Huang and all the rest of them. I think he brought them there for a very specific reason. Like, look, we can do great things together, as opposed to having to spend all of our money on friggin', you know, worrying about whether or not we're have to, you know, go to war with each other tomorrow. Not saying we, you know, shouldn't rebuild our militaries or anything, and have defensive militaries, but, you know, let's not kid ourselves. We have a world to. There are planets to conquer. There's all this cool shit out there that we should be doing. Why are we like focused on this stuff? And I think that's what Trump is. I think that's what Trump is saying, to selling to everybody at this point. And I think that sales pitch is hitting, and it's hitting hard. And it's the social media that's trying desperately to return us to a status quo that served nobody's purposes.
Well, I want to segue into China. We'll end on this. because obviously, like you said, this wasn't a normal meeting. You had Elon Musk, all of these big tech company CEOs in tow. A lot of niceties and kind words exchanged between Trump and Xi. They want to strengthen their relationship. What are the headlines missing about this meeting? And also, part of me wonders, China knows how to play the game very well. Do you think they really are fully on board with trying to form a cooperation with America, whether that's through trade, because obviously they have some pretty serious export restrictions. The one that jumps to mind the most is their rare earth export restrictions, which are just vital for military and defense technology. Do you see a world where we return to China lifting those export restrictions on the United States and a cooperation being able to form? Or is there a possibility that she's playing the game, he's putting on a show, he's saying all the right things, but he's just going to go right back to what he was doing before?
No, I don't think so. I think Xi's responses were all to Trump. He's like, Xi plays the game. Like, it's leverage. Like, you think Trump didn't expect Xi to turn around and put an export ban on rare earths when, Trump slaps a big freaking tariff on him? Like, of course. Like, that's there's nothing wrong. I mean, honestly, everybody, like, again, Jesse, I mean, I'm not calling you out on it. Like, I'm like watching the world, and I'm like, everybody lights their hair on fire over what is literally just normal everyday freaking negotiations between two powerful countries. Like, the reality is that Trump was given the full Monty in China, and in a way that was disturbing to the old world. The way I've laid it out to other people on other podcasts, and I actually did a show for Ben Keller the other day with my partner Dexter White. We actually did one of our conversations in public as opposed to the one we do on our phones like 6 times a week, right? Um, and what what I said there was, I said a couple of things. Ben asked the questions like, "Well, what do you expect to come out of this meeting?" I said, "Well, first thing I expect is for Trump to secure a deal for the Chinese to buy Alaskan oil." Well, that was like the first thing that came out. I'm like, oh, ding. Like, of course, this makes sense, right? Let's start there. Let's build on the things that we agree on. The rare earths thing, again, lithium, rare earths, we have them. What we haven't had is the processing facilities. And I can tell you, as a former water chemist, like, this shit's not that hard. What's always, we live in this world where we're like, oh my God, it takes 15 years to get anything done. Yes, because the bureaucratic state that was we imported from Europe was brought in here in order to mung everything up and make everything go crazy. And like, Anderl's building friggin' new drones and new weapon systems in 6 months. You think we can't spin up a rare earth filtering plant? Like, really? Like, we're the ones who invented the technology in the first place. The Chinese went home with it and just built factories because we weren't doing it, because we didn't, because our leadership wasn't interested in securing that business for ourselves. Like, we can do this. And so one of the things we have to remind ourselves about, and again, this is part of that whole narrative that the United States is collapsing and China's the rising power and all this. How about the United States is Gulliver and the rest of the world are a bunch of Lilliputians? Not the Chinese, but everybody else is just a bunch of Lilliputians trying to hold Gulliver down. And Gulliver sort of kind of wakes up and goes, no, I'm standing up. I'm doing the world. I'm doing the thing. And we can turn this thing around very quickly. And everybody just tries to spend all of their time trying to slow everything down, little by little, bit by bit. You see it everywhere. Refineries being shut down, like all of this stuff. And it's all just this, it's like the routine of the guy getting chased by the or the girl getting chased by the serial killer in the movie, and they throw like throwing the kitchen sink and the chair and the this and the that and everything else in front of him. Like, he's coming, he's a primal force. It's like Darth Vader at the end of Rogue One. Um, he's coming. He's not going to stop. It's like, I hate to compare the United States to Darth Vader in this, but in this respect, but it's a kind of um, you know, it's this kind of inevitability that once we stop playing this learned helplessness game, we stop accepting the fact that we can't do something and start saying, oh, what can we do? It's just a mindset shift. And yeah, is it going to take a few years for this thing to really turn itself around? Absolutely. Do the Chinese have leverage in that time frame to get get as many concessions out of Trump as possible on these fronts? Of course. But that does not mean, and that means that Trump is probably going to have to make deals, like he said this morning about, maybe the Chinese are going to have to build factories here in the United States. We're going to have a certain number of Chinese students at our universities and everything else. That's just dealing with the demographic problem that we don't have enough people at this kids ready to go fill in these into these these positions. But it's not like we're not willing. It just takes time to get those kids trained and change the demographic process, right? What did if you think back to when the Soviet Union fell, and the Soviet Union fell while I was in college, but even when we were discussing the late stages of it when I was in high school, and I remember sitting in social studies classes, as a junior and senior in high school, and saying, when this is all done, the Russian people are going to take a generation to fix the things that have been. It's going to take a generation. The Russians are going to, the Russian people the Russians are going to have to do something to. They're either going to have to suck it up for a generation while they bootstrap themselves, or they can accelerate that process by, you know, um, by bringing in outside people to help, bring in outside capital, help rebuild. Um, you know, Demographics are real. I'm not a huge fan of demographic arguments because I always think that the law of diminishing marginal utility is far more powerful than you know that. I just think it's a really powerful thing, and that we may have to accept certain things in Trump's deal here that isn't with China that we're not going to like in the short term because it doesn't make it a fundamental betrayal because the world is complicated, the world is nuanced, it's nothing is black and white, and 90% of the commentary that we're watching at this point surrounding Trump is literally black and white. He's either doing everything right or he's doing everything wrong. I don't believe that. I like and or anytime he crosses this particular thing, you know whatever it is, I can't stand it. Like, oh, dudes, like, why are you not president then? Like, there's a certain point where you just have to like say, this is the path you're on, and it's not a particularly good one. And so we have to you know, the immortal words of the guy from Full Metal Jacket. It's a big shit sandwich, and everybody has to take a bite. And we may have to work a little harder to get out of it, right? And we may have to really think it through. But if the opportunities are there and the mindset shift is there, as a, we can do this as opposed to we can't do it, oh, anything's possible. This is part of the reason why I've been adamant that I'm not really watching the Dow at this point, and I'm not really watching the S&P 500. I'm not even watching the Nasdaq. The only U.S. index I'm watching right now is the Russell 2K. I'm watching small caps in the United States to see if entrepreneurs and small caps are getting preferential investment money. That's to me, then I mean, clearly between that and then the simple Dow transport or Dow, simple Dow theory, the transports versus the Dow Jones. Like that's my equity market analysis is there, and I'm not watching anything else because I think everything else is noise. I think everything else is potential is a mixture of hot money flow and this and that, and all this other stuff that complicates things and can be conflated with other things that are happening in the global marketplace. But no one is investing in the Russell 2K stocks in order um, to park temporary capital, right? They people park temporary capital in the Dow because they're not sure what to do with it. Well, let's park it in the Dow. It won't. It's hard to move price on the Dow, right? Same thing with the S&P 500. But the Russell 2K, that's a different story. You start putting your money there, it's going to move. And large investors who don't know what to do are not going to be putting their money in the Russell 2K unless they see a durable change, and then they start allocating another 0.5%, 1%, 2% of their portfolio to those types of stocks. And then, so we should see if Trump's transformation of and rewiring of the world is durable, we're going to see emerging markets of and not politically complicated emerging markets like India, but because I don't consider even India at this point shouldn't even be considered an emerging market. Um, Emerging markets, U.S. small caps, maybe even Chinese small caps. I think that's where you should be looking at, to see, if this thing is durable or not, because we're going to see a bottom up revolution. We're going to see a bottom up equity market rally here if, while we work through all this stuff. But again, in the short term, Trump's probably going to hit Iran hard. There's a brewing dollar liquidity crisis. Gold and silver are ending the weak. The dollar is ending weak. Bonds are being sold off. The rest of the summer is looking like is probably looking like a replay. I wouldn't say of 2008, but some form of that. And certainly our partners over in crime over in Europe would love nothing more than to drop the financial crisis onto Donald Trump in the eve of the midterms. So you got a bracket for that, right? But looking around the world right now, with Kevin Warsh coming in at the Fed and the variety of other things happening, I can see a dollar liquidity crisis starting in the offshore markets, and we start to really lose control of the long end of a lot of yield curves. Not the United States necessarily, but everybody else's, especially Europe. And this is I mean, I've been calling for this for years, but now we actually have like a real fundamental shift in the way the world operates. That's going to like blow open a whole lot of old investment theses. And the people who are just kind of like, I don't really get it. And, they're going to start getting it very, very quickly. And someone's going to run out of money. And when they do, it's going to start moving. I don't think it's going to be Japan. I think Japan is very well situated. Well, the Nikkei at 63,000 is telling me that. So, that's what I think.
Tell us about the Gold Goats and Guns blog and podcast, as well as your Patreon.
Sure. The blog is I actually started writing again for the first time in a long time. So I've been trying to get a couple of articles out a month at the very least. Post them up on the blog, post them up on X. The podcast, again, it's been a very troubling, difficult couple of months. So I haven't actually published very many podcasts, but I think I have Brent Johnson on the horn for later in the month. So that'll be, $2 bulls going at it. And that'll be fun. I haven't talked to Brent in almost a year. I'm going to try and get a few other people on this summer. I really do want to go through all my finance contacts list and get everybody on the podcast this summer. And the Patreon is where we, that's how we make our bones. We do the monthly newsletter, which I think is a ridiculously good value, along with the portfolio, with a very well performing portfolio overall over the last 8 or 9 years, and I'll put my performance up against anybody else's, and then of course the twice weekly market reports where we stay tactical on a weekly basis, trying to figure out what's actually going on in the world and tie all of these, like everything I talked about today, I can tie directly to the markets. And I do it, it's hard to do here on a podcast like this, but I do it twice a week over slides with, and looking at charts and looking at bond spreads and looking at all that stuff, and the currency moves and everything, and just to see how that's all lines up with the big geopolitical events. And yeah, I'm not, I think we do it pretty well. So it's not very expensive, and we're trying to keep it cheap to allow, the average investor to figure out a way to, where to deploy their capital with some degree of confidence.
Great. Well, I'm going to put links in the description below to Gold Goats and Guns, as well as the Patreon and the podcast. Tom, as always, love having you on the show. Thank you so much.
It was good seeing. It's good catching up, Jesse. You look well. So I hope the world is treating you well. So take care.
Thank you for joining us today. This episode is brought to you by ARC Silver Gold Osmium. They have some great prices on silver bullion products. They are on your screen right now. These are subject to change. Well, supplies last. So reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com, and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.